Hi, I'm Lily Corbis-Besner of the University of Montana Art Department, and I am pleased to welcome you to this lecture by artist Miriam Shapiro, which is offered through the generosity of the Jim and Jane Dew Visiting Artist Series. Tonight we are fortunate to have with us an artist who occupies a pivotal place in the history of art, as well as in the history of feminism. Since 1958, Miriam Shapiro, who actually began her career in art as a child, has had numerous group and solo exhibitions from New York to LA to Alberta, and abroad to Bonn, Stuttgart, Vienna, and Zurich. Her work is housed in a long list of museums, including the National Gallery of Art in Washington and the Whitney in New York. In addition, she's received many awards, including a Ford Foundation grant and an NEA fellowship. Ms. Shapiro is especially known for her work with the feminist art program at the California Institute of the Arts in 1971. There she and Judy Chicago, along with the students in the class they were teaching, asked the question, what would art look like if made in the image of domesticity by a group of women artists? They answered with a collaborative project called Woman House, in which they created an environment for women artists in a condemned house in Los Angeles. This once neglected building fittingly became a place that housed collective and individual creations of domestic dramas. Ms. Shapiro is perhaps best known as well for developing a style of collage painting that incorporates typically female and traditionally dismissed arts, such as quilting, sewing, applique. Known as femage, Ms. Shapiro's technique broke the boundaries between high and low art forms. As a result, crafts become moving symbols of women's lives with rich, layered meanings. They become, Ms. Shapiro herself says, quote, natural materials needed for spiritual, often physical, survival. More recently, Ms. Shapiro has sought imaginary collaborations with women artists of the past. Her most recent show, collaboration series, Frida and Me, intertwines her life with that of Frida Kahlo, another artist concerned with the issues of work, love, creativity. As critic Eileen Rosenzweig has written of this series, quote, Ms. Shapiro hopes to forge a tradition of artists from which a future generation of women can draw creative strength, unquote. Miriam Shapiro is an artist whose work satisfies both the heart and the mind. Hers is an art of meaningful content as well as compelling aesthetics. I spent the morning with Ms. Shapiro as she rummaged in second-hand stores for the so-called junk of our lives. I experienced firsthand her humanistic concern for the lives of women and men. Because of Ms. Shapiro, I probably will never again look at an embroidered handkerchief without thinking of the anonymous woman who labored to create a small, potent artifact and so enriched her life. Please join me in welcoming artist Miriam Shapiro.
Thank you. That was lovely. I am delighted to be here. It's really exciting for someone who lives in New York, to venture out west and to try to get in touch with all of the experiences that you have, that you love living here. It's extremely hard to do it in a few days, but I have good companionship and leadership and teachership and mentorship here in the group of women that have been taking me around, and so I'm learning a lot. The talk tonight is, it's called A Seamless Life, and I'd like to just try and explain a little bit about why I use that title. I was raised, as my professional career began, I was raised in the New York art world. And I was raised there and began my career there at a time when there was a very famous critic named Clement Greenberg who had a kind of stranglehold on the New York art world, and everyone curried his favor, and all the artists were in awe of him. And the rules were very strict about how you made art and what kind of formulae you use to make art. And I feel, as looking back, as though I learned my lessons very well. The basic lesson was to become a modernist painter, an abstract expressionist painter, and so forth. And I was fortunate. I was probably one of the few women who exhibited in rather prestigious gallery in New York City, 16 years with Andre Emmerich, showing every other year, and sort of conducting my education in public. And yet, there was something about this life in art that was not fully satisfying. However, in those days, and I'm talking about the late 50s and the 60s, there was no language for women to express what was missing. Of course, what was missing was a woman's life. Because when men tutor you and train you, and you live among them as a professional, you, in a sense, become a man. In other words, it is very important for you, in order to advance your status, even when you're in college, to be able to communicate with your male teacher and have and understand his empathic responses, so that you can meet him at a point where he will understand what you're doing. And that was only possible in those days if you were able to create that which he understood. So I feel as though in those early years I did function in an art society like a man, and that was the professionalism. So at the point in 1970, when I went to California and I began to work with women, and I did consciousness raising, and my life changed, and I began to find the language to express the discontent with what I had been doing. At that point, I was able to tap all of my womanly heritage and to begin to try to understand aspects of my mother and my aunts and my grandmother in a different way, because like other women, I had put women down in my mind, because as Simone de Beauvoir as she said so intelligently, we were and are the second sex, and therefore we were not winners, we were losers. In fact, as I was growing up, if you birthed a baby and the baby was not a male, you already started out the baby's life as being a loser. So I found out a lot of things about myself when I became a feminist in the early 70s, and the thing that was so interesting was that when I was in New York, before I'd gone to California, I had my life at home, and my life at home consisted of my husband, who is Paul Brock, and my child, and I also, as part of my family, there was my mother and father, who I took care for as well. So that was one aspect of my life. And then the other aspect of my life was that I would leave that arena and then go to the studio the way the men did. But when I got to, and so I had separate lives. And when I got to California, I was able to have one life where my home and my studio and the aspects of my home were able to move into my studio. And at the point that I chose to make art out of my real life, then I began to understand what fabric meant to me. and fabric was my signifier. And I began to use fabric in my art. In other words, I painted my paintings, but I glued fabric to the surface of my paintings. In my old life, one of my pals was an artist named Al Held. And when my art changed, Al Held was heard to say, "Oh, Miriam, she left the true faith." And so I did. Now, the seamless life, as you can see, refers to the act of bringing the realism of my everyday, ordinary life into the studio. What I'm going to talk to you about tonight involves the words women's culture. And I define women's culture as a body of ideas, customs, and rituals which are independent of male contribution. It's a kind of encirclement of knowledge gathered by women, often outside of history or art history as we know it. Okay, can we have the first slide, please? The first slide is a gift, and it's a gift that was not made by me, but it was a gift to me. It was made by an artist named Holly Taylor. Holly Taylor lived in North Carolina, and she and I both knew a woman named Paula Bradley, and Paula Bradley was going to be traveling from North Carolina to my studio in Soho in New York City, and Holly Taylor, although she did not know me, wanted to send me a gift. And this gift was very special, and the minute I saw it, I was extremely touched by it. The gift had an intimacy which is universal among women. Can I have the next slide, please? The cover of the gift was pink, and it was tied with a white wool ribbon, or a white piece of wool, actually. And the power of this gift came from its form. As I got the gift, I opened it up, and I unfolded a container of secrets. And the secrets were in pockets, and they were fabrics, and they were handkerchiefs. And the fabrics were from the 20s and from the 30s, and they were all rolled up. Now, Holly Taylor knew about my work and what I had been doing, so she knew that I would appreciate what she was giving to me. Next, please. There is a nurturance implicit in this gift, a kind of encoding that belongs to women. The materials are soft and sensuous. It is a feeling art. And this is a gift from women's culture. We define ourselves. We define ourselves and we define our culture separate from the world of men. And what Holly knew about me, aside from the fact that I used the fabric as a signifier on my canvases, was that I had been traveling. And in my travels, I'd gotten very confused. I started this in 1970. In fact, there were many women artists who did this, as well as me. And I was moving so fast and taking messages across the culture, and I got to places and I didn't even know where I was. So I got the idea to ask the women in the audience if they would send me a small souvenir, perhaps a handkerchief, which would be, if they would give it to me, if I could take it back in my suitcase. And I also wanted them to write their names and the town in which I was, because that was what was confusing me. So they did that, and I took the handkerchiefs back to my studio in Soho, in New York, and I made a canvas which was a square, and I gridded it up, and I painted each box a different color, and then carefully I glued all of the handkerchiefs onto the squares. And on the back of the canvas, I wrote all the women's names, and the date, and the town. And I called the painting Connection. Next, please. And she knew that, and so she sent me more handkerchiefs. Next, please. Now, this is a painting I call American Dreams. And at this point, I was beginning to do a very serious investigation into women's traditional arts, the arts of needlework, the art of tatting and knitting and sewing and quilting. And I realized that it was I learned this from my research, that it was the women who, from earliest times on, were the humanizers of our environment, with all the attention they paid to the nests that we grew up in and we lived in and that we learned to love. They were the ones who made the nests more humane and more beautiful. So I call this American Dreams. It has all of the, it has quilt blocks in it, and it has little half rounds cut from fabric, and it has buttons, and it has teapots cut from fabric, and all of these things glued on, and then it has little spurts of marks, paints, various colors, and then it has children's doll clothes, and so forth. And when we think about America and we think about discovery and adventure, we usually think of men. And I wanted to give this painting this title because I wanted clearly to establish that American dreams can also belong to women. Next, please. And this is the painting that I just told you about, Connection. And around this time, I was invited to go to Corvallis in Oregon. I was invited by one of the artists in the art department there. And she wanted to know if I would care to make prints in the print department. And so I said yes, and they invited a whole group of women, 10 of them, back to Corvallis, women who had graduated from this university and who had gone through the print department. And the plan was that I would make a portfolio of 10 prints, and I would use materials that I had found from my flea marketing and so forth and my search, aspects of women's culture. So these are crocheted pieces. Next, please. And a piece like this was called an antimacassar. Macassar was the name of an oil that people used for their hair to, straighten out and flatten down their hair and so forth. And the women did not want the oil all over the overstuffed couches and chairs and so forth. So they would make these antimacassars and pin them onto the furniture. And then when you sat against the furniture, you got the oil all over these things as opposed to getting it all over the chairs, because you could wash these doilies, but you couldn't so easily take the oil out of the chairs. So they were called antimacassars. And I made this, I brought my little suitcase with me with all of these things, and each woman picked out one of these artifacts, and the process was very simple. The piece would be dipped in soft ground, then it would be etched, then it would be inked up and printed. And at one point, this group of works was presented to the print department at the Museum of Modern Art. And remember, this was early, it was the mid-70s, and we were told that it was not suitable for the Museum of Modern Art, this folio, because it had no technical bravura. But that, of course, was code for the fact that the content was not of any interest, because in mainstream art, feminism and feminist art was not exactly what museums wanted to acquire. Since then, of course, it has been acquired by various museums. Next, please. When I was introduced tonight, Lily told you about my experiences in California, where Judy Chicago and I and 21 women students created the groundbreaking experiment in feminist art, which was called Woman House. This had international reverberations. I know, I can tell you intimate stories about how I met women who came from Europe to the United States, and who told me that through the underground, the slides had been passed and crossed the ocean. And one German woman told me that she was teaching from those slides in her college. So that was a very exciting kind of bit of history to be part of. But after being with my family for a decade, almost a decade, in California, I came back to New York. I came back a different person. And I was destined to have one more show at the Andre Emmerich Gallery, and I decided that what I wanted to do was to reappear in New York with my new persona, as it were, and I wanted to make a statement, and how best to do that. So I decided to imitate the men and take territory. And of course, if you were a painter, the way you took territory was to make a very big picture. So I made this 50-foot picture. And it is in 10 sections, and it's called The Anatomy of a Kimono. Now, my idealism was very, very strong, and still is. But at that point, I wanted to create royal robes for the new woman. And so someone had given me a book, which was the story of the kimono, and it was printed in Japan. And it took 2 years for me to generate the idea for the painting. And this painting has, it's a sort of color procession. It starts with very pale gold and pinks and purples and so forth, lavenders. And then it moves to a more neutral section, and then it moves to a sort of deep, sonorous black section, and then finishes up on a sort of crescendo of red. Next, please. And this is the central motif, which gets repeated about 4 times. And this is the sort of neutral section. And so the kimono itself is flanked by a kind of kick form and an obi form. And that was so that I could have 2 different kinds of geometrical characters. And the kimono itself was chosen by me. It's actually pretty close to the original kimono that I saw in the Japanese book. And I loved it because it had these very simple verticals. And what I did was to fill the verticals with colored forms, each color being different, and then finding different fabrics, a lot of them transparent, and those fabrics glued onto the painted forms. Next, please. This is the, it's actually the same image as I just showed you before, only the slide is different. But I'm putting this on the screen because you can see that there were several sections in the anatomy of a kimono where the section itself did not add up to being either the kimono or the obi or the kick form, but was just a sort of, was the anatomy itself. And in the next slide, please, you can see how the materials are laid on. Sew a While and Be in Style was probably written by a child, embroidered by a child. And one of the things that's so fascinating about textiles is that if you do this kind of search that I did, which involved, at its highest point, going to museums, where I discovered that the textile departments of museums were the departments that actually required the most money for maintenance. And yet when you would see an exhibition of textiles in the museum, you never saw that it was women who had done the pieces that you were looking at. Whereas we know that it was women who did most of the weavings and most of the, from all over the world, most of the quilts and so forth. Also, you found out a lot, I found out a lot about sewing itself. I found out that there was a class distinction between people who were very poor, for instance, the slaves on the plantations in the years before the Civil War. Their quilts were made in a hurry because you needed many, many quilts to keep warm with, and the stitches on the quilts were very big, oversized stitches, because the fingers of the people who worked in the who worked on the grounds were swollen often, and it was hard to hold a needle properly. Whereas, just by contrast, say the wife of the plantation owner could sit and work on fabric and keep it very clean, not sweat on it, and also could make as much as 30 stitches to an inch, which was very, very fine kind of work. So all this kind of information gets revealed as you go deep into women's culture and learn about race and class and so forth. Next, please. Well, I myself can't sew, and so, I mean, I did the best I could, which was to paint a quilt or create a collage. It was also mentioned tonight that I invented the word femage, which is my own way of honoring women's culture, because femage to me is a combination of homage and then the technical side of it, collage, but collage by women. So this is one of my largest femage pieces. It's about 144 inches across and about 90 inches high. And this was a work that I made after I was invited to go to Australia. And as Lily said, we spent the morning doing various things, but one of them was hunting for pieces to incorporate in Femage works. And I specifically was looking this morning for pieces which would indicate, again, the place I was in, so that it would have some reference to the West, and more particularly to the role of women in the West. So at this point, again, 25 years later, I'm asking people in the audience that if you have any such fabrics that might indicate that these were particularly done in the West, and you're willing to give them up, I would love to put them in a painting. At any rate, I will read you something that I wrote after I was in Australia. I made this painting, it's called Wonderland. I made this painting after I returned from Australia in 1983. I had been invited by the Australians to exhibit in the 4th Biennale of Sydney, to participate in some symposia, and to give some talks in their art schools. While I was there, I looked for needlework to incorporate into my Femage paintings. I found and used some crocheted pieces detailing maps of Australia. I discovered a lovely work with the initials for Elizabeth Rex, as well as some cloth pictures of Aussie products, potholders, aprons, and so forth. It was like traveling with my eye directed to women's culture, looking for objects which presented images of domesticity, just like the ones I used in America. Returning to my studio, I assembled my fabrics, my quilt blocks, and ordered them around a central image. I hope you can see that. I'm sorry I don't have a detail. And the image, the central image in this painting, is of the apologetic housewife. She makes a slight curtsy in our direction, as if to say, I am sorry. That's a very tender and touching and sad kind of note, because, and think of the idea of it being drawn and it being embroidered, the lowered consciousness of the housewife whose kitchen isn't clean enough, it isn't perfect enough, it isn't quite right for you, the visitor, to come and enjoy her hospitality. She will never be good enough. Anyway, working on this large canvas was like transforming her excuse for living into a statement of extensive proportions. But then maybe that's what it takes to raise a housewife's lowered consciousness. So the painting, as you can see, has an ideational quality to it in terms of my politics, as well as the joy of its creation. And that involves an extensive kind of painting underneath all of the fabrics and all of the, you see there's a kind of X form, and those are thin strips of fabric which are patiently glued onto the colored surfaces beneath. And if you were to stand in front of this painting itself, you would see that the paint was one factor, the transparent fabric another, and out of that came a third factor, which I call energy, which energizes the painting. So a lot of my old understanding of modernism stays with me, and I think that it isn't that I, myself as an artist, turned art around in the way that Holly Taylor did with her gift. But what I did was to make an amalgam between the art as I had learned it from early on and from my New York years, and an art I invented after declaring myself a feminist. Next, please. Out of quilt iconography, I found a whole series of images, icons, which I then used. I made a sort of lexicon of forms which I used and made individual paintings out of: the house, the heart, the kimono, the fan, and so forth. And I'll show you some of them. This one combines the house and the heart. And this picture was actually dedicated to my mother. And involves for me that turning around that happens in a woman's life in terms of the relationship between mother and daughter. The big house is my mother's house. The big heart is my mother's heart. And as I grew up, the little house in the center of the heart was my house, my little house. And then as time went on, my mother's 94 now. And so the big house is now my house. And the big heart belongs to each one of us. And the little house has become my mother's house. And that's just a fact of life. And that's something that women live through and is often extremely painful. Next, please. And here you can see, this is about 64 inches across and 64 high. And you can see that I've incorporated the little, very small pattern of quilt blocks and have cut out flowers from fabric. And I have actually written on the subject of geometry and flowers and have received great pleasure from being able to establish a kind of force field of the patterning and then kind of break it up by dispersing the flowers over and through the quilt forms. Around this time, after having worked hard and established with other women the feminist movement in art, I then joined with men, and as did other women, and we formed yet another movement, which was dubbed by the journalists and critics the Pattern and Decoration Movement. And it all started when an artist named Robert Zukanich came to me when I was in California and said, look, so many of us are now working in similar ways, and perhaps we should talk to each other and show each other our slides and see what it is that's motivating each one of us. So Joyce Kozlov and Valerie Jourdain and Robert Kushner and Robert Zukanich and Kim McConnell and myself began these meetings and began to talk about our work. And you know, I have to go pretty fast because there's so much to tell, but I have to encapsulate this for you. It got around that we were doing this, and people were very interested in it because it was something very different. The decorative affected mainstream strongly. Not only did it affect it at that moment, but it seeded ideas, thoughts, which moved around the world, and people picked up on these ideas really rather quickly. And they have been sustained and are being continued. Now, some of the men had their own reasons for being involved in the pattern and decoration concept, but I will just speak for myself and for some of the other women. We were interested in feminism, and we were interested in the history of the decorative as it applied to women. For example, in pre-literate society, when men were shamans, they were the only ones allowed to make anthropomorphic forms. So it was given to the women to make the geometric forms. So if you think back, you know, to all of the early pots with geometry on them in various tribes and cultures all over the world. And when you think, say, specifically of the Navajo eye dazzler blankets, you'll know what I'm talking about. And again, I'm making this very short. But the point is that in the culture of women, that is our tradition. We grew up with that, and we became masters of geometry. And I am particularly interested in this as a developmental idea because I love geometry, and I'm always using it. As you can see, I make these iconic works, and they have so much of geometry in them. Next, please. When the feminist movement was beginning, the phrase which dominated the history at that time was that the personal was the political. And when this movement got started, and I was having a show of these works, in the Village Voice there was a full-page article which was headed, "Decorative is not a dirty word." And if you had lived at that time, in that particular spot, you would have known what a taboo decorative was to high art. And so this was a really radical, punchy kind of motion on the part of these artists. Well, this painting is about 92 inches high, and I call it the poet. And I call it the poet because no one else would. It's about the domestic engineer, of course, and her contributions to society, and her costumes, and her creativity. And I'm so much interested in the idea of domesticity as the locus for the art-making process, and I feel that it's something that I have tried to talk about and so that it could be clear that this is an artistic process and that the women who worked with these techniques, I have always felt, were just as interested in creating something of beauty as I was. So therefore, there was a tie between us. Next, please. Now, when I was invited to Australia, it was the painting, of course, which was invited as well as me, and this painting was 12 feet across and 6 feet high. And again, the same layering takes place. In fact, an endless form, an endless process of layering, color and then fabric, and then painting on top of the fabric, and then more fabric, this time perhaps metallic or whatever, and then layered on over and over and over. And you, of course, understand that this process cannot be done while the painting is hanging from the wall, as in my old days of abstract expressionism, where it was just, a matter of me standing in front of the wall and in front of the canvas and expressing away. This was a process of putting the canvas on the tables and then me climbing up to, particularly to the center, and when I was working on the center of the canvases, and kneeing my way across so that I could glue all of the metallic fabrics and all of the places where I used glitter and metallic dust and so forth. And that work is arduous, and also having all my cut flowers and arranging them. It's also, you know how you do when you paint. You want to do the actual painting and then walk back and see what it is you've done. But that's very hard to do with this kind of work because you don't get the chance to hop off the table and see what it is, you know, that you've just glued on. So a lot of this has to go on, you have to go on faith and on the experience of making art that you've had for 20 years before. Next, please. And this is a smaller fan, and it's it is 4 feet high and 8 feet across. And this one was made after I came back from Mexico. Next, please. And you can see the geometry in there. This is my summer studio in East Hampton, Long Island. And you can see at the top the windows and the trees outside, and the light is coming from a source close to the right-hand edge of the slide. And there's a fan on the table that's being worked on. And the screen on the wall, I call it a screen. It's not really a screen, it's a representation of a screen, and it's in 6 sections. And at that point, I had come back from Mexico, and I was very excited about trying to reproduce something that was inspired by those so-called low art paintings of Jesus on black velvet. So the idea that I might be successful in defying the high art notion of the taboo of decoration and work with this absolutely unthinkable subject of making a kind of decorative object on black velvet. Well, of course, this wasn't black velvet, it was black paint. But it was a real challenge. And I still remember Zakanich coming into the studio because he also lives and has a studio on Long Island near me. And I remember his response to it because he was a fellow artist who knew exactly what I was doing and thought I had, you know, succeeded. And so there was a tacit understanding between us at that moment. Next, please. And this gives some idea of the materials. There's a small diagonal band in the lower left-hand corner here, which is actually a kind of ribbon encrusted with stones and with gold threads. And then above that, there is the fabric, which is cut, the flower, which is cut from fabric. Then there are oodles of dots. And over on the other side, there's a flower, which is also one of these metallic flowers that you get in certain kinds of ribbon stores, which specialize. And on. And then all of these materials come from the search I do, the various searches that I go on looking for extremely decorative objects that I can incorporate. Next, please. Well, this begins the section on my collaboration series. What happened was that in the mid-'70s, there was an exhibition that was put together by Linda Nochlin and Ann Sutherland Harris, which was called Women Artists 1550 to 1950. Now, I've already told you about my involvement with women's traditional arts, which, where I'm talking about the women I call the artist makers. But now I'm going to talk a little bit about the women who received fine arts training. And that, of course, didn't happen until late in the 19th century. And when women who formerly had not been permitted to attend art schools were allowed into art schools, they were not allowed to draw from the nude model. And so they would bring cows into the studios where women were working. and the women had to draw the cows and paint the cows and so forth. So let's face it, it wasn't easy. The whole history, it wasn't easy. Anyway, Mary Cassatt was one of the women who surfaced in the history of art and made wonderful paintings. So as I was able now to look at the history of women in art through this incredible exhibition that they had put together, I had this wonderful idea that I would make a whole series of works based on my collaborating with women of the past. And that way I would tie myself to them, and I would create an ancestry for myself, and I would be part of a continuum. And this is all very romantic, but these are the kinds of thoughts that you get when a whole world is opening up to you, and you feel strongly about being part of that world. And so I bought a book which had Mary Cassatt illustrations in it, and I bought it expressly so that I could cut it up and use it in the works. These are small works on paper. And I made my patterns and the various framing devices and put in some photographs that I had taken of the Atlantic Ocean, which is close to my house in East Hampton. Next, please. And this is Mary Cassatt, and the photographs are photographs of my own domestic interior. Not so neat as you might think, but nevertheless mine. And then there was a tragedy, artistic, aesthetic tragedy befell me. And what was that? Well, I couldn't go on with the series. There were no books on women artists. And if you think for a minute that that wasn't a great blow, you're mistaken. I just had to keep on making images with Mary Cassatt because the Berthe Morisot came from a book on watercolor, and there was only one Berthe Morisot in it. So there were no books on Berthe Morisot. So it was George O'Keeffe and Mary Cassatt, and that was about the sum and substance of it. Next, please. I'd like to talk a little bit about my series on theater. I have always made these theatrical images, and the theater, for me, has two parts. One is the decorated structure, and of course you can realize by now where the desire to do that comes from. And then the staged event. Unlike real theater, my images are frozen tableau. It is not revealed how the drama came to pass, only what exists visually for a moment. And frequently these are theatrical interpretations which have to do with style alone, and then in a minute you'll see they have to do with content. Next, please. And here, can we get this a little bit clearer, more focused? Good. This is called Master of Ceremonies. And here, some of my ideas about men come out. I don't think that men, in the ways that they've been socialized, have had it so easy. You must understand, when you hear talks like this, and you hear the words like patriarchy, I am addressing myself to institutions. I am not addressing myself to individual men. Because if I were to address myself to individual men, then I would have to say that they haven't had it so easy, not here in this country. Because I believe that men are required to perform, and more than perform, they're required to win. And if men feel that they haven't won by the age of 40, it's very hard on them. And this painting is about that as much as it's about something else. The master of ceremonies is dancing above the flames. So it's fraught with terror. But the painting is also about the two women and their desire for the man. On one side, there's the woman who is the artist. And somebody once said to me, well, why does she have that sort of ragamuffin or Raggedy Ann doll face? And she had it was painted at that time because my sense of women was that they were for a very long time, they were in the act of becoming. They hadn't really become grown-ups yet. Women have always been infantilized, and it took several generations for women to establish themselves in the mode that they wanted to establish themselves in. As defined, as mature, as focused, as self-directed. I did not think at the time I painted this painting that we as women were in that particular mode as yet. And so there she is, she's the artist, and she is involved with creating beauty, and she is totally possessed by this need and desire to be an artist. And so she has a limited amount of time to devote to the man. And the woman on the other side has all the time in the world to devote to the man. So choices are made by women who wish to become artists, and they're very difficult choices about whether to have the so-called full life or to selfishly pursue the dream of a pursuit of a profession, a career, or what have you. Next, please. And you can see that this painting and the one before it both have that framing device, which is akin to a theatrical frame. And here, the central woman is in the act of becoming, and she's got many arms, many legs, and she's supposedly evolving. In both these paintings, there's a lot of attention given to source material from European culture, Klee and Kandinsky and so forth. And then this central figure, again, has a lot of Sonia Delaunay in it. The artist in the other picture she herself was a painting. In her clothing, it was represented as a Delaunay painting. This woman is flanked by a woman and by a man who are walking off in different directions. Next, please. This series was based on the puppet theater Punch and Judy. And Punch and Judy evolved in about the late 17th, 18th century, and it was a classic puppet theater with classic stories, and people used to take these cardboard theaters around and put on plays for people who loved the kind of domestic violence that was shown. Also, at this time, I began another collaboration, which was this time with Frida Kahlo, who was the Mexican artist, the wife of Diego Rivera. And Frida Kahlo had a way of painting her self-portrait, and she would put frequently on her forehead in a circle that which she was thinking of. So if she was thinking about Diego, her philandering husband, who was constantly having affairs, then she would put his portrait on her forehead. And here in the Punch and Judy, they were always sort of knocking each other over the heads with pots and pans because theirs was like Frida and Diego, theirs was a very volatile marriage. Here Punch is thinking of Frida, and Judy is thinking of Diego. Next, please. This is about demons. This is about an artist's life, and this is about being in the studio and having the demons attack you. You laugh as though it's never happened to you, and I envy you. But they do come, and they do make you crazy, and they do make you paranoid, and then they go, and if you're having a really good day, the angels come. So that's it. It's either the demons or the angels. Next, please. And here, of course, are Punch and Judy surrounded by the demons again. Next, please. This is a painting that I did that's called Pas de Deux. And it involves, again, I simply don't have time to show you, but a whole stretch of my work, which is about dancing and dancers. And can we have the next one, please? At a certain point, I began to liberate the figures from my paintings and work with colored papers and make these 8-foot tall cutouts. So there was the painting which I just showed you, and now the cutout, and now if we change to the next slide, please, you can see that there's just a kind of evolution in this case, because what you're looking at is the making of a sculpture of these two figures, and the sculpture is called Anna and David, and this is the woman this is the Anna. And what you see is a very extravagant kind of honeycomb interior for the sculpture. Next slide, please, which is 35 feet tall and about 6 inches wide. And what happened was I am not a sculptor, and a patron came to me, and he had wanted to buy that painting, but it was already sold. So the next best thing, as far as he was concerned, was to sort of order me to make a sculpture. But I said, I'm not a sculptor. And he said, well, do the best you can. So the best I could do was to make a 35-foot sculpture and to invent my own way of making sculpture, because this is painted, and it's exactly the same on the front as it is on the back. And I did this sculpture after I was 60. I started the femage and the real change in my work when I was 48. And I cite these particular facts so that they can be somehow encouraging to my women colleagues in the audience. Next, please. And this is the night view of Anna and David. I'll read you something. The man who ran this factory where the work was produced was giving some sort of slideshow and using these images, and he sent me his paper, and he begins by saying, imagine a sail 35 feet high and almost as wide in Rosslyn, Virginia, with 100-mile-an-hour winds headed for Norfolk. Now make that sail of aluminum weighing 12,000 pounds and stand it up on 3 skinny points. And then he writes, got it? That should make you appreciate the engineering problems confronting Talec's Foundry, that's the name of the place, where they were asked to build Anna and David for Miriam Shapiro. Next, please. And this is, again, a photograph of my studio in East Hampton. And what happened here was that I was asked by some people in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, who had just put up a performing arts center, if I would make a painting for their center. And I think this is about 12 feet high and 11 feet across, and I did this last summer. The funny thing about this, I think, is that I painted the theater first. I was asked specifically to make a theater, and you see the various sketches around, and I made the theater first and then put the dancers in it. So the next slide, I think, will show the finished work. And you see how the idea of theater, the ideas of decoration, the ideas of dance, all come together in a work like this. This represents years and years of working with dancers and working with the theaters and so forth. Next, please. Well, this is the last. This is from the last work I did, which was shown about 6 months ago at the Bernice Steinbaum Gallery in New York, and it is the Frida series. And what I tried to do, because there's a great cult of Frida painters in this country, and I tried not to make culty paintings. I mean, I wasn't interested in that. What I was interested in was continuing the series as I had begun it many years ago, and as I will continue to go on to do more of different women artists. And the inspiration was to try and see where my life intersected with aspects of her life. And so I created here a very strong woman. And this, of course, was a woman, I don't know how many of you know, that she was in a devastating accident when she was young, about 19. And she was in a bus, and the bus collided with another car, and it was just horrible because in the accident, a steel rod went right through her body, and it was pulled out by two men on the bus. And her life was saved, and she was sent to hospital. And for the rest of her life, she had many, about 33 surgeries, something like that, and was very frail and fragile, but had an inner strength and made this body of work, which, by the way, was very small, because most of the paintings that she made as she lay in bed. And the paintings were, the very small paintings were propped on her stomach, and she worked in this arduous manner. And her work was very unusual in that it was diaristic and small and intimate. And all the work that I have done of her has been enormous. I've just magnified, which is something that I do. I mean, I take an idea and I just magnify it. And this painting is, again, about probably 144 across and 90 high, something like that. And she had a terrible problem. She wanted very much to give birth, and she had several abortions because of her health. It was advised by her doctors, and it was a great sadness to her that she couldn't give birth. And so I've included the small birthing sculpture, the goddess who is giving birth. And of course, that was something she and I did not have in common, because I did give birth to a son who is now 35 years old. And on the upper right, there's a sort of springtime or summer sensibility, which has to do with where she lived in Mexico and how much she loved her particular environment. And yet, she and her husband, Diego was the most famous, Diego Rivera, most famous Mexican painter, and they lived a very jet-set life when they were married. he was much older than she was. And the urbanity of their life is represented in the upper left. I found a fabric that showed, that was essentially black and white and showed sort of urban scenes. And then, of course, the pots, which are the heritage of Mexico and were made by women. And the flowers and the fabric and the flowers on the fabric. It was very labor-intensive, this work, and I worked, it's one of those paintings where I painted on the fabric and then was dissatisfied and glued other transparent fabric over it, and that sort of process. Next, please. Now, the central image here is exactly mimed from her painting of herself with the steel rod. But all of the surround is my own abstract interpretation. And what I was feeling when I was making this painting was, especially in the outer frame, was the sense of her interior movement and blood and vessels and all of the kinds of experiences you might think of within the body. And this is a very large painting. This is this was just purchased by the Brooklyn Museum. Next, please. And I wanted to make a painting of her love of the folk art of Mexico, because that intersects with my own love of the folk art that I have found all over the world. And there are images from posada here, and then there are images from embroidery, and images from different parts of Mexico, special centers of certain kinds of folk art that are decorated in a certain way. Also, because her body gave her so much pain, I sort of eliminated her body in this painting and just used her head with the Tijuana headdress that she loved to wear, the palette, and her hands. And the next one, please. Here again, using the Punch and Judy ideas and making the circles with the Frida and Diego heads, using them in terms of how they were thinking of each other. And I called this work, it's a very small work, The Searchers, because they were both artists. Next, please. And finally, a painting, because I'd had so much fun at their expense with the volatility of their marriage, the volatility of everyone's marriage, and had painted them sort of being demonic to each other. I thought that I wanted to paint them in a more loving atmosphere. And so again, the theater, and the two of them within the theater, and this painting is called Love's Labor. And I'm just going to end now reading you something that I wrote for the announcement of my last show, which was the Frida show. This exhibition represents a continuation of an ongoing series of collaborations I began many years ago. These imaginary collaborations combine my own ideas and collage, femage, impulse with concepts and images derived partially from paintings made by celebrated women in the past. When I was an art student, I longed to feel that I was part of a continuing line of creative women in my field. No amount of reading in the history of art 45 years ago helped. At that time, there was no mention of women artists in the textbooks. For someone searching for an identity of her own, this was a great loss. I experienced an absence of ancestry. It was only after 1970, aided by women who were art historians, that I discovered the names and images of Fontana, Gentileschi, Reusch, Labigillard, Popova, Hawk, and Sonia Delaunay, among others. My collaboration series began as an homage to women artists. I chose Frida Kahlo for this series because she was a remarkable painter, one who understood from her own house of pain a woman's suffering and indignity. She was the consummate creator of the diaristic, intimate world she inhabited. I view her self-portraits as a looking glass. Frida Kahlo was a woman who prevailed despite seemingly insurmountable circumstances. Thank you. The rights to the book were published by another publisher, so it's still available. It's a lot about the dancers, yeah. And there's some books that are being written now. Will come out. The name of the book is Rondo. Mm-hmm. There were a few hands, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about something as you were talking. So many of your images are women's domestic life. And there has been a history of painting, a sort of genre among male artists,
Yes.
of the artist in the studio. And I was struck by the fact that you showed many slides of the studio and many images of women's domestic life. And I wonder if you ever had self-representations or representations of women in the studio collapses at home.
I actually have a lot of slides, and you know, since I've come out to the West, I've talked at Pullman and Moscow and Spokane, and it occurred to me along the way that I probably should have incorporated some of those slides, because, yeah, I do have a lot of them, actually. Thanks. There was someone else over there, I think, raised their hand. Yeah.
You said you started doing art when you were 6 years old. Can you tell me in what context?
Well, my father was an artist, and he started to discipline me. I mean, he saw I had some talent, you know, so he started to discipline me. And what he said was that I had to make drawings of my room or look in the mirror and draw myself. I mean, he told me what to do. And then when I got older, we would go to the country, my mother, my father, and me, and he would he would stay in the city and work, and then he would come out on weekends. And I was severely disciplined by both of them, and he said that I had to have, by the weekend, I had to have 5 drawings, and he wanted big drawings. And and the idea was I was supposed to make 1 drawing a day, so I wouldn't do it. I would go out and play, you know, and then the day before he came, I'd sit down and make all the drawings. He was really a strange sort of person, because he was very much a loner, and the only way I could actually access him was through the art. And at one point, he thought I really should have training from the nude model, and there was a WPA class where they had a model at night in the local high school. And I was 14 years old, and he took me to that high school at night, and we waited until the teacher was free and the class was over, and we walked up to the teacher, and my father said, I'd like to enroll my daughter in this class. And the teacher looked at me in absolute horror and said, how old is she? And my father said, how old does she have to be? And he said, well, at least 18. And I was 14. My father shoved me. He was in back of me. He said, he shoved me toward the teacher and said, she's 18. But I had, in my research and in the research that other people have made, it has been established that those women in the history of art who were not allowed to attend school were trained in the studios of their fathers, you know, in Italy and France. Rosa Bonheur, women in Italy, Artemisia Gentileschi, whose father was Orazio, who was very famous, and so forth. So that was a tradition. And I am grateful to my father for that early direction, because although I often think that the rest of my life has gone, you know, flown apart in many ways, I was always very clear about the art and very clear about the direction, and have always worked, you know, so that was good. Yeah.
In all this, you trained in New York in basically a male-dominated area. Basically, they wanted you to do it their way.
Oh, yeah.
I just want to know, how did you, you must have felt some anger at that. How did you contain that anger and remain disciplined? Why didn't you give up?
I'm married to a man for 44 years now. We were students when we got married, and he's a painter. And I don't know how it happened, but this was a man who totally supported me. So after I sort of left the domain of my father, I picked up another such man. And he sustained me, you know, and he really believed in me. And for example, one of the first exciting professional things that happened to me was that I was asked to show in what they called New Talent at the Museum of Modern Art in the penthouse. Each year they would pick out some people. And what happened, how I got into that show was that my husband met the curator of that department, and the curator was it was a very small art world then. You have to understand that. It's totally different now. But it was a very small art world with very few galleries and so forth. And everybody knew everybody. And so he was walking with this man who was curating the show this particular year. And the man was bemoaning the fact that he hadn't really seen a lot of talent around. And my husband said to him, you really should see Miriam's work because she's very good. And the fellow came and saw my work and put me in the show. So I always say of myself, because it was so hard for women at that time, that I piggybacked on Paul's shoulders, because he used to go forth into society, you know, and when he could, he would put in a word for me. And then if they liked the work, that's what happened. So in a way, I was lucky, you know. In a way, I had this kind of fortune. And then I think when I became a feminist, it became very important to me what the concept of sisterhood was, because I had been lucky. I felt it was sort of my duty to pass it on and to do what I could for other women. And so I think one of the reasons that I knocked myself out, you know, coming around and doing all these talks and everything and still doing them, is because I still believe that and hope to be, you know, some kind of model for other women to keep doing it when I no longer can do it, you know. Yeah.
You know, in all of your work that you showed tonight, it's very bright, it's very alive, it's very light. You know, I think about male culture, and I think about the darker side of male culture, the wars and everything. Is there a darker side to female culture, and if so, do you express it?
Oh, yes, but no, I don't express it, but other women do. Oh, other women do. You have to just see what's going on. Oh. And I have often felt that the reason I don't do it is because of, not that I haven't experienced it, but that I can only live by hope. I can only live by fighting against depression, fighting against the dark side. It's not my way to show it. It's my way to show the hope, to show the aspiration, to show the part that dreams of a better world, and the part that wishes to participate in the enjoyment of that world. Because I think it's equally important to make a point of the fact that we are capable of love and enjoyment, and that we are not so obsessed by guilt that we can only see one aspect of life, you know. I think that that's part of my own credo, but it's not even something I thought out. It's something that just evolved, yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes?
Are there other books that show your earlier homage?
There's a lot of catalogs, and there are books that have, you know, parts of my development. There's a book called Working It Out that it's by Daniels and Ruddick. That's an anthology of artists and scholars speaking about their lives. And then there's a book by Charlotte Robinson called Artists and Quilters, I think, or something like that, in which I have an essay on geometry and flowers. That's an important essay for that part of my work. And as I say, there are a few books being written now. And that's about it. A lot of